Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump and his family's monetization of the presidency and U.S. foreign policy, as witnessed this week with the White House state visit of Saudi Arabia's previously shunned crown prince. Joining us to assess how much money the Saudis have lined Trump's pockets with and Trump's decades-long obsession with getting his name on the Forbes 400 list of the wealthiest Americans is Dan Alexander, a senior editor at Forbes, overseeing money and politics coverage, as well as the author of White House Inc., How Donald Trump Turned the Presidency into a Business. He has investigated the personal finances of Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Wilbur Ross, and others, and his work has sparked state and federal investigations, came up repeatedly in Trump's fraud trial, and helped send longtime Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to jail. His latest articles at Forbes we will discuss are Here's How Much Trump Received for Hosting Saudi-backed golf events, and Here's Everything We Need to Know About Trump's Financial Ties to Saudi Arabia. Then, with the biggest donor to Republicans in the last election, Elon Musk, getting a $1 trillion payday from Tesla, we'll examine how America's 902 billionaires, with a collective wealth of $6.7 trillion, donated one in every $13 spent in last year's election, over 80% of which went to Republicans. Joining us is William Cohan, a former senior Wall Street investment banker for over 17 years at Lazard Frere and Company, Merrill Lynch, and J.P. Morgan Chase, as well as a New York Times bestselling author whose books include Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World, House of Cards, A Tale of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street, and most recently, Power Failure, The Rise and Fall of an American Icon. He is a founding partner at Puck News, and has an article at the New York Times, The World's Most Shameless Public Figure Does It Again. Then finally, we'll assess Trump's 28-point peace plan, which he's trying to shove down Zelensky's throat, giving him until Thursday to either accept Putin's wish list or have U.S. intel and weapons supplies cut off. Joining us is Anders Aslund, a senior fellow at the Stockholm Free World Forum, a professor at the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University, and a former senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. A member of the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, he worked as a Swedish diplomat in Moscow and served as an economic advisor to the governments of Russia and Ukraine. His books include Ukraine, What Went Wrong and How to Fix It, and Russia's Crony Capitalism, The Path from Market Economy to Kleptocracy. And before we begin, for over a decade, we have warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty, but more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible to restore democracy and civility and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And also, before we begin, I want to direct listeners to our YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram handles, where our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, has begun posting daily updates and highlights from the daily programs. So find us at Ian Masters Media to help further our mission of creating a reality-based community in post-truth America by spreading the word. And joining us now, Dan Alexander, a senior editor at Forbes, overseeing money and politics coverage, as well as the author of White House Inc., How Donald Trump Turned the Presidency into a Business. He has investigated the personal finances of Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Wilbur Ross, and others, and his work has sparked state and federal investigations and came up repeatedly in Trump's fraud trial and helped send longtime Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to jail. his latest articles at Forbes are, here's how much Trump received for hosting Saudi-backed golf events, and here's everything we need to know about Trump's financial ties to Saudi Arabia. Welcome to Background Briefing, Dan Alexander.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And your book, White House Inc., How Donald Trump Turned the Presidency into a Business, is about how Trump tried to translate power into profit in his first term as president from the 2016 campaign all the way through the 2020 campaign. So, given that he's in his second presidency, which is only a little over 9 months long, this wannabe billionaire is now a billionaire. Probably, I don't know whether it's for the first time, but certainly it's happened at incredible speed, almost entirely due to crypto and beneficiaries from the Emiratis and other Gulf Arabs. So, is that correct to suggest, Dan, that the wannabe billionaire who said he was a billionaire forever, and I guess he was bugging Forbes to put him on the list, wasn't he? Is that accurate to say that maybe for the first time now, in his second presidency, he's become a billionaire?
No, that's not quite right. He did lie about his net worth for many, many years and was not a billionaire at times when he said that he was. But he was indeed a true billionaire during his first presidency. And at that point it was of course mostly real estate, but he had, over $2 billion of net assets at the time that he left the White House in his first term. But what's happened is that he really sort of supercharged the business during his years out of office and then once he's moved into the presidency. And it happened in a couple of different ways. The first thing was he created a social media company, the Trump Media and Technology Group, operates Truth Social. And that went public. And when it went public, investors got super excited. And Donald Trump held on to a large chunk of shares. Those shares are now worth over $1 billion in their own right. That company has since pivoted from social media to focus a lot on crypto as well, but he had already made a pile of money when it was simply a social media company in that sphere of his empire. Then you have other cryptocurrency ventures, World Liberty Financial and the meme coin, which have added massive amounts of money to his coffers since he took office. So now, he's much richer than he was in the first term, and richer than he had been any time before he became president for the second time. But he was, in fact, still very rich in his first term and for many years before that. Just not as rich as he said.
And so, when was he first on the Forbes list of the 400 richest people in the
His
US?
very first year was in 1982, and he was listed with his father, and they were listed with a combined fortune of $200 million. In that instance, he had duped us into thinking that he owned a greater share of the family fortune than he actually did. But over the years, he ultimately did receive, a lot of his father's assets and expand into some of his own and create a true, legitimate billion-dollar real estate fortune.
So, let's talk about the recent White House meeting with Mohammed bin Salman and the big state dinner that on a Tuesday night. And of course, that next day, there was the big meeting of various U.S. corporate heads and Saudis, clearly looking for investment opportunities or some kind of a payoff from the Saudis. But what did the United States get out of this deal, by the way? I mean, we know what the Saudis got. They got the F-35s and a whole bunch of other things that they wanted, the latest chips and etc. But what did the U.S. get out of it?
Well, the U.S. got the promise of massive amounts of investment. So the Saudi government had already pledged to invest $600 billion in the United States, and that number ratcheted up to about $1 trillion during this visit. We'll see what exactly that entails and whether it all comes to fruition. But theoretically, that was the trade. The U.S. gives Saudi Arabia legitimacy, which it had lacked following the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and Saudi Arabia gives the U.S. billions of dollars in investment.
And the 600 million was over 4 years, right? And
Yeah,
that's
yeah, these things are generally phased out over time. I mean, obviously, they're not going to dump in $1 trillion tomorrow. Um, but nonetheless, even if you spread it out over several years, it's an awful lot of money that, could make a real difference for a lot of American companies.
But if you look at the 150 billion per year, that implies the equivalent of 14% of Saudi Arabia's annual gross domestic product, 40% of its annual export revenues, and just over 50% of its annual imports. And just for context, 9% of Saudi Arabia's imports come from the United States in 2024, compared to 23% from China. So it's hard to see how, if it particularly if it's going to be bumped up to $1 trillion, how
This,
the
yeah, this is
Saudis,
going to be
do they have that kind of money? I mean,
this is going to be one of the big questions going forward is, is this an empty promise or is it actually fulfilled? Obviously, there's a lot of things that the Saudis can spend money on right now and do want to spend money on. Like a lot of other wealthy Gulf nations, they've been on sort of a long quest to diversify themselves away from strictly energy providers. And, with the AI boom and with all this data center expansion, there's a ton of money going into that right now. And Saudi Arabia has already invested a significant amount and could theoretically invest a lot more. Will it get to that $1 trillion figure? We'll check back in about 5 years.
right. So why were all of the big Silicon Valley billionaire tech bros there at that dinner on Tuesday night? First of all, Elon Musk appears to be rehabilitated. He was there, and Trump lavished praise on the head of NVIDIA, who was also there. So, are these people aware of the possibility that these investment opportunities may not be as great as they promised, or why do you think they were all sort of eagerly there at that?
Well, look, they all have, something to gain. I mean, Saudi Arabia does legitimately have a lot of money and has spent it investing in, US tech companies in the past and is looks to be doing that again. If you just take the NVIDIA example, one of the big problems that NVIDIA faces, although it's got so many advantages, is that the United States controls where it can sell its products. And there's been a lot of tightening of that in recent years as it's become clear that its AI chips are so valuable for all sorts of applications, economic growth, military strength. And so the US has restricted where it can sell a lot of this stuff. Every new market that it can enter is an enormous opportunity for NVIDIA. And even if it's just a small amount of chips, I say small, 70,000 chips, it's not that small, but even if it's a relatively small amount of chips at the start, those could grow into bigger relationships. Some of the context here for NVIDIA is that their revenue, if you look, in their latest quarterly filings, they're doing about 5% of their business from China. But if you go back a year before that, it was almost 25% of their business. So as the US has gotten more protectionist and has been more careful about where that technology goes, one of their major markets has closed. The opportunity to then chase new markets in the Middle East is important for them. If you look at Elon Musk, they're talking about a massive data center partnered with NVIDIA in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has an enormous amount of cheap land and an enormous amount of energy, two things that you need for data centers. You also need a lot of water, which, it's a hot area of the world, but nonetheless, they can find their way around that. So, taking those sort of raw ingredients, they want to position themselves as we're going to have a lot of the data centers that are sort of powering this next AI phase. Now, XAI is one AI company, but if they say, hey, we're going to build a massive data center project over there, partnered with NVIDIA, that really could propel their effort forward in Saudi Arabia to become a part of this next revolution, become a part of the AI age.
But all of these promises from Saudi Arabia of future investments, since it's a petro state, this means that forget about global warming, right?
Yeah, well, look, their oil is going to run out. And so they've been on this, quest for a long time to figure out, okay, we've got all this money and we've got all this money right now. We want to make sure that we can endure. And if you look around the Middle East, there are some successful examples of this. So, for instance, in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai was originally largely an energy economy as well. And it's successfully diversified itself to now where it has this sort of broad base of tourism and financial center and, a lot of real estate, all sorts of things going on there. If you look elsewhere, say in, Abu Dhabi or in Riyadh, these places are a little bit further behind in terms of diversification, but ultimately that's where they're trying to go, where they're not fully dependent on oil. And as you say, also subject to the, criticisms and challenges with climate change.
So, Dan Alexander, let's talk about your article at Forbes. Here's everything we need to know about Trump's financial ties to Saudi Arabia. Starting in '87, Trump made deals with Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi arms dealer, who I think he's the uncle of the Washington Post reporter who was murdered and dismembered by the Saudis. And the CIA found that it was on the orders of Mohammed bin Salman. And he ended up with this yacht, the Trump Princess. And then later on, he bought an airline and also the Plaza Hotel, which he then turned around and sold to Prince Alwaleed for 325 million, taking a loss of 80 million. So, is that an example of Trump not being the great businessman in the art of the deal?
Well, look, in the late 1980s, he made some massive mistakes. I mean, he comes into Manhattan in the early 1980s, actually late 70s is when he did the Grand Hyatt, and then Trump Tower opens in 1983. Both of those projects were fairly successful for him, and it builds up a lot of confidence, that he can sort of build anything, do anything he wants. And he sort of believes that and follows that and starts buying up everything, taking out massive amounts of debt to build properties in Atlantic City. When he bought the Plaza Hotel, he admitted at the time that he purchased, I'm overpaying for this asset, but he called it a Mona Lisa. I want to own the Mona Lisa. Okay, well, if your Mona Lisa goes bankrupt, then maybe it's not so pretty anymore. But, and he's talked about the mistakes that he made in that era. And certainly there was a slew of bankruptcies, he got way overextended. But what united him to the Saudis in that time was that there were a lot of wealthy people in Saudi Arabia who liked fancy toys. And Donald Trump also liked fancy toys. And so they started trading fancy toys, right? So he gets the old yacht from Adnan Khashoggi. And yeah, he trades the Plaza Hotel at a loss, but nonetheless still for a pretty penny to Prince Alwaleed and some other investors in 1995. So that was really what tied them. And sort of over the years, they had sporadic interaction between then. And we can go through through the timeline, but it really has intensified in recent years.
So, and of course, we all know about Jared Kushner getting the $2 billion for Affinity Partners, which apparently the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund didn't want to do that, but MBS intervened. And that has gotten a lot of attention. And then later, of course, Trump being a beneficiary of the Saudi-backed Live Golf tournament, I think he got $800,000 out of it for hosting it at one of his golf properties. What would the total be then of what he's gotten out of Saudi Arabia? Because it's he's doubling down now, I think, and we don't know what deals were made necessarily the other night, do we?
Well, so if you look just to last year and you total up both his personal take and then also of his extended family, so the $2 billion in Jared Kushner's fund, that gets 1.25% management fees. So you can do the math, that's about $25 million a year. Donald Trump made $21 million last year from a Saudi firm, Dar Global, which is a large real estate company that's agreed to do licensing deals with him, four of them in Saudi Arabia and several others elsewhere. Live Golf has provided a little bit more. The $800,000 was just for one event. He's held seven events at this point. He's got an eighth coming up next year. So altogether, that's maybe about $6 million. If you add up all of that stuff, you're looking at maybe $50 million, something like that. And then on strictly the licensing and Jared Kushner's fees, you can expect those to be similar or perhaps a little bit elevated here in 2025. Going forward, they're talking about additional licensing deals. So it wouldn't surprise me if that continues to sort of scale up over time. Certainly, it's a significant amount of money for Donald Trump, for his extended family. It's a big deal for these guys.
Well, it looks like Kushner's done well because Affinity Partners have teamed up with the Saudi Sovereign Investment Fund to buy the video game giant Electronic Arts, right, for 55 billion.
Massive deal. Massive deal. Yeah.
Right, and that's probably a good deal, right?
Well, we'll see. Time will tell. But certainly, it's an enormous deal. And anytime you have a large private equity deal, you have chances for large profits. Also, you could have losses. So we'll see in 5 years. It's too early to decide whether or not that's a good deal at this point.
But in terms of monetizing his presidency and monetizing foreign policy, which is what we're talking about in terms of what just went on in the White House with the Saudis, and particularly with Mohammed bin Salman. And I'm sure you saw, Dan, the exchange with a reporter from ABC News who asked a real question that journalists are supposed to ask, which really upset Trump. And Trump talked about how great MBS's human rights record was, and he castigated the reporter for asking such a rude question, which was about, his culpability for murdering and dismembering Jamal Khashoggi. So I'm wondering about the other big deals that are going on in terms of foreign policy, and that is how Trump is in the process of trying to force this deal down Zelensky's throat. And of course, Zelensky's somewhat on the ropes because of a corruption scandal in Ukraine, brokered or negotiated by Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the deal is essentially Putin's wish list. Is there a possibility, since the Saudi Wealth Fund was so generous to Jared Kushner, is there a possibility that the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund is being used as a dangle to entice Trump to make a deal, which many see as a complete sellout of Ukraine?
I haven't seen evidence of it, but you never know. I mean, every 6 months or so, there's sort of another escalation in terms of ethics norms that are broken. And I have not seen, significant amounts of money coming into Trump's portfolio from Russia in recent years. There was, a very large deal about 15 years ago or something like that. And Trump was pursuing multiple avenues for a new licensing deal in Russia during his 2016 campaign. But I haven't seen big inflows in the last several years. And if you were to see that, it certainly would be sort of another step. The fact that they're open to doing, business all over the world theoretically opens up the possibility. But again, until we see those deals materialize, it would be getting a little ahead of ourselves to say that, that negotiation is tied to a deal that we don't know if it exists yet.
But was it in 2008 that one of the Trump sons said, we're doing incredibly well and we don't need any capital because most of our capital is coming from Russia?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting comment, one that I think has been misunderstood over the years. So, the backstory here is that Eric Trump was at a golf course in outside of Charlotte, I believe it was. I forget the exact year, but that's the right ballpark. And he was talking with a golf writer who said, where do you guys get your financing? And he said, we don't need banks, something to the effect of, we don't need banks. We have the financing that we need out of Russia. Now, Eric Trump has denied saying that quote, but the golf writer has said, that yes, in fact, he did say it. That quote sort of set off a lot of questions and speculation over the years about the fact that there must be massive amounts of Russian money in Trump's business. But there are a couple of key misunderstandings here. First of all, a lot of Trump's golf business was financed with something, this is a little in the weeds here, but something called membership liabilities. Essentially, the members join a club with the promise that they can get that money back eventually. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it sort of finances the purchase of the club or the construction of the club for the owner. And Trump did a lot of that. So that provided a lot of his golf financing. He also received several windfalls from various deals that helped him expand the golf empire. And one of the deals was that in Palm Beach, he sold a mansion to a Russian billionaire for, an admittedly suspiciously high number that put about $100 million into his coffers. And when Eric Trump said that, it was around the time that that deal happened. So he could have easily just been referring to that transaction that, we all know about and has been out in the open, and certainly would have provided them liquidity to do some additional golf deals. I mean, remember, these golf courses, you can buy them for, 5, 10, $15 million. These aren't like massive assets. So that's how I understand that comment. And certainly there's been a lot of speculation about, other possibilities for it over the years. And I'll just say, having looked at this stuff very closely for 8 or 9 years now, that's the conclusion that I have tentatively arrived at this point, that's what that all meant.
Well, Dan Alexander, I appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
And again, I've been speaking with Dan Alexander, who's a senior editor at Forbes, overseeing money and politics coverage, as well as the author of White House Inc., How Donald Trump Turned the Presidency into a Business. He has investigated the personal finances of Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Wilbur Ross, and others, and his work has sparked state and federal investigations and came up repeatedly in Trump's fraud trial and helped send longtime Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to jail. His latest articles at Forbes are Here's How Much Trump Received for Hosting Saudi-Backed Golf Events, and Here's Everything We Need to Know About Trump's Financial Ties to Saudi Arabia. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back looking into Elon Musk's $1 trillion payday and how America's 902 billionaires with a collective worth of $6.7 trillion donated one in every $13 spent in last year's elections, over 80% of which went to Republicans.
I laughed and shook his hand and made my way back home. I searched for form and land. For years and years I roamed. I gazed a gazeless stare at all the millions here. We must have died alone a long, long time ago. Who knows? Not me. We never lost control. Your place to place with the man who sold the world.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is William Cohan, a former senior Wall Street investment banker for 17 years at Lazard Frères and Company, Merrill Lynch, and JP Morgan Chase, as well as a New York Times best-selling author whose books include Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World, House of Cards, A Tale of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street, and most recently, Power Failure, The Rise and Fall of an American Icon. He is a founding partner at Puck News, and he has an article at the New York Times, The World's Most Shameless Public Figure Does It Again. Welcome to Background Briefing, William Cohan.
Thank you, Ian. Always great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Bill. And of course, the world's most shameless figure is Elon Musk, who's just been given a $1 trillion payday by the Tesla shareholders. He controls the board with family and friends. So there's no surprise there. But he was also at the recent White House dinner on Tuesday night, where Trump was hosting Mohammed bin Salman, otherwise known as Prince Bonesaw, and it looks like he's back in the fold. What happened there? How did he get rehabilitated with Trump?
Well, I think first I just want to add the thought that his rival for the most, Elon's rival for the most shameless individual on the face of the planet is, of course, his buddy Donald Trump. So they're pretty much two peas in a pod at this point. I mean, the list of things that Donald Trump has done that evidence his superpower of shamelessness, is long, and maybe not even need to, enumerate them. But starting with tearing down the East Wing of the White House, celebrating. Uh, Mohammed bin Salman, at the White House and joking and, saying that his human rights record is irrelevant, basically. I mean, the list, as we all both know, goes on for a very long time. So I think they're two peas in a pod in terms of shamelessness. And I think that once Trump, had succeeded in, pretty much humiliating Elon during the Doge phase early in the second term. Elon went sort of back, licked his wounds, seemed to straighten himself up a little bit, got a nice haircut, and came back to the White House as a friend of Trump, without any role anymore. And I think, that's probably why he was invited back, because he's no longer trying to upstage Trump in any way, and that they're their partnership has sort of run its course, and now he can go back to being a proper supplicant, like so many other CEOs who didn't have any problem whatsoever with showing up at the White House for that formal dinner.
But does this mean that he'll be opening up his wallet in 2016 for the Republicans? Because in the last cycle, in 2024, he doled out $294 million to help Trump and other Republicans in both federal and state elections. And tech bros and other billionaires joined in, and they basically gave about $509 million more to Republicans than to Democrats. So is that a part of it? I mean, he's obviously cleaned up his act. Maybe he's cutting down on his consumption of ketamine. But what do you think about
Well,
the money thing? I mean, isn't that a way to get rehabilitated?
well, of course, it's the mother's milk of politics, and it does look like he has cleaned up his ketamine act, as you suggested. I mean, he had problems. He didn't. His money didn't always help him, succeed, as we all discovered. What in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. But look, Ian, he's got what $430 billion these days, and could very well have another be the first trillionaire soon enough. So giving 300 million or whatever to help elect his friends and Republican politicians is nothing for him. It's literally a drop in the bucket. And if he had some setbacks during the 2014 political cycle, it's by the midterms next year, that'll be a faded memory, and I'm sure he'll be geared up and ready to, assuming he's still buddy with Trump at that point, which I'm sure since it's beneficial to both men, he will be. I'm sure he will give plenty of money to Republicans, maybe even the biggest single donor among all billionaires. And so I'm surprised. I would be surprised if he didn't do that. In fact, he likes the access, he likes the attention, he likes the what he gets out of using a little bit of his money for this purpose.
Well, there's an article at the Washington Post how billionaires took over American politics. It says since 2000, political giving by the wealthiest 100 Americans in federal elections has gone up almost 140 times. And in 2000, the country's wealthiest 100 people donated about 1/4% to the total of costs in federal elections. But by 2024, they covered about 7.5%. And that is roughly one in every $13 spent in last year's national election was donated by a handful of the country's richest people. So this goes beyond Elon Musk, right? He's maybe the leader of the pack, but this
Yes,
is
this is an epidemic,
right.
Ian. This is an epidemic. Once upon a time, there were, a handful of people you might consider to be billionaires, and now it's just been an explosion of billionaires. I mean, into levels of wealth that are frankly mind-boggling and disturbing and almost inconceivable. I mean, the idea that Elon Musk could want, let alone deserve, a pay package of $1 trillion from Tesla and actually get it is, I think, all prima facie evidence of how out of whack all of this excessive wealth and compensation for executives has become. And of course, they're going to use their influence and a small, tiny portion of their wealth to advance their political needs, and you have, or desires, and you have a president who's more than willing to play ball with them on this. And so something that's going on as we speak that's obviously very relevant to many of your listeners is what might be happening to Warner Brothers Discovery, and whether Larry Ellison, through Paramount Skydance will succeed in taking it over. Well, as we know, Larry Ellison is the number two wealthiest individual, and he's big friends with Trump, and so the betting is that Paramount Skydance will win Warner Brothers Discovery, if for no other reason than the regulatory path for him will be much easier than it would be for other bidders, whether it's Comcast or Netflix, because of his buddy buddy relationship with Trump. And so what used to be, an objective regulatory process, or wholly objective, largely objective, based on the facts of antitrust or competitive overlap, or basic objective measures, has become totally politicized. And so this is not any way to run a regulatory environment, but you can see that the rules of the road have changed, and these wealthy billionaires can just see what they have to do to appeal to Trump to get what they want, and he's an easy mark, and he just does it.
Well, it'll be the end of CNN. CNN will become Fox News, and CBS is rapidly in the process of becoming Fox News. So that's the agenda of the Ellisons. But when you were talking about the incredible growth in terms of billionaires in this country, America's 902 billionaires are collectively worth more than $6.7 trillion. But only a decade ago, there was half as many billionaires in the United States with a total wealth of 2.6 trillion. And the Washington Post article that I mentioned goes on to point out that more than 80% of the federal campaign spending by the 100 wealthiest Americans in 2024 went to Republicans. So there's the imbalance there. They literally are buying our democracy, and while Trump is destroying it, right?
Yeah, it's a real double whammy that is extremely unfortunate, and we're sort of watching it unfold in real time. And I think by and large, people feel extraordinarily powerless to do anything about it. Although there are increasingly instances of fighting back, whether it's the No Kings March, or frankly the outcome of the few elections earlier this month in Virginia and New Jersey. Frankly, governor's races were encouraging, although I think it was discouraging to see a number of the Democratic senators who agreed to, in effect, give in and to the Republican agenda in terms of reopening the government without getting anything for it. But maybe politically that was a wise move, because the pain was starting to be felt with the government shutdown, and the Republicans were just completely intransigent and unwilling to negotiate for basic human rights, like healthcare coverage for millions of Americans who are going to find that their healthcare costs are going up rapidly, and as they have been for years anyway. So maybe that'll redound to the Democrats' benefit at some point, because as a realpolitik matter, it was better to open the government than to continue to fight for something that wasn't going to happen. But so it's really distressing. Obviously, we talk about it a lot, and it's extremely distressing. The display of the black-tied billionaires at the formal dinner at the White House the other night with MBS was extremely distressing, and we have to look forward to, Ian, I guess, that same show being put on again at some point in the near future in Trump's new $300 million ballroom, which he took down the east wing of the White House is in the process of building, which even Brian Roberts at Comcast, who gave money to try to somehow get back into Trump's good graces. The whole thing is just very, very distressing, un-American, and I wish there were people who in these positions of power and respect who would stand up to what's going on here.
So
But
just
those people seem far and few between.
right. But just in the last couple of minutes, Bill, what are you hearing on Wall Street? Because Trump really does pay attention to Wall Street. Trump appears to be losing it. I mean, it's pretty amazing the way he did a love fest with Mandami in the White House on Friday, which was pretty extraordinary. But again, Mandani's a winner, and Trump likes winners, and he wanted to be associated with him. And you have to hand it to Trump; he is a smart politician. He knows how vulnerable he is on the affordability issues, so he's sort of, getting some of Mandani's fairy dust sprinkled on him in that thing. And of course, you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene now quitting, so there may be more of a split in MAGA. But in general, what are you hearing about Trump's mental stability? Not the least of which he just recently threatened to kill or have executed a bunch of U.S. Democratic House members and senators, all of whom are veterans.
I mean, I've had questions about Donald Trump's mental acuity and stability for a very long time, and I think it goes back, from the moment he, rode down the escalator in Trump Tower in June of 2025, and talked about, criminals and rapists coming from Mexico over the border, and even before that, to questioning, Barack Obama's patriotism and birth certificate, even from the days that I interviewed him in 2013 and 2014 for articles in the Atlantic and Vanity Fair about him. And I'm sure it goes back well before that. But this is the will of the people. Ian, 77 million people voted for him the second time after living through Trump won. They thought that was great, and they therefore wanted him back. 77 million people, and so until the American population, the voting population, comes to grips with the reality of this individual, and dispenses with the whole MAGA charade, we've gonna have to deal with this for the next 3 years, because we know he's impeachment proof. He's proven that in Trump won, and basically very few Republicans in Congress will stand up to him. So the next chance to put a check on him will be the midterms next November, and hopefully that will happen.
Well, William Cohan, I thank you very much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with William Cohan, as a former senior Wall Street investment banker for 17 years at Lazard Frères and Company, Merrill Lynch, and JP Morgan Chase, as well as a New York Times bestselling author whose books include Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World, House of Cards, A Tale of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street, and most recently, Power Failure, The Rise and Fall of an American Icon. And he's a founding partner at Puck News and has an article at the New York Times, The World's Most Shameless Public Figure Does It Again. We're going to take a brief station break, back assessing Trump's 28-point peace plan, which he's trying to shove down Zelensky's throat, giving him until Thursday to either accept Putin's wish list or have U.S. intel and weapons supplies cut off.
Like the castle in his corner in a medieval game, I foresee terrible trouble, and I stay here just the same. I'm a fool to do your dirty work, oh yeah. I don't wanna do your dirty work no more.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Anders Aslund, a Senior Fellow at the Stockholm Free World Forum, a professor at the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University, and a former Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. A member of the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, he worked as a Swedish diplomat in Moscow and served as an economic advisor to the governments of Russia and Ukraine. And these books include Ukraine, What Went Wrong and How to Fix It, and Russia's Crony Capitalism, The Path from Market Economy to Kleptocracy. Welcome to Background Briefing, Anders Aslund.
Thank you very much.
So President Trump has given Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky till Thursday, till Thanksgiving, to agree to a deal. Otherwise, he will cut off intelligence and weapons transfers to Ukraine. And this 28-point peace deal is such a Putin wish list. It goes way beyond anything that was even negotiated back in Turkey in 2022. It is absolutely breathtaking in what a sellout he's expecting of Zelensky, who went on national television on Dignity Day to basically say, the choice is to give up our dignity or lose our main ally. So why has Trump put Ukraine in this untenable position?
Yeah, but first, as you imply, this is a Kremlin proposal. This is not a US proposal. It's not a negotiated proposal. This seems to have been presented by Kirill Dmitriev, who's the top businessman in the so-called Putin family. He's married to the best friend of Putin's daughter, Katya. And Kirill Dmitriev is then the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, which had a number of top US CEOs on its advisory council before the war. So he's the top operator on the US, and he has clearly Stephen Witkoff under his control. And Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev have Trump under their control. Why? We don't know. But this proposal essentially amounts to a capitulation by Ukraine. And Trump asked for a capitulation by Ukraine within 1 week. This must not be done. And unfortunately, we are now seeing that the three top European leaders, Kirill Starmer of Britain, President Emmanuel Macron of France, and Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, are getting together and discuss how they should handle this. There's only one way of handling it. It is say no, reject it all together. Because this is a Kremlin proposal. As you said, this is somewhat worse than what the Kremlin proposed in April 2022 in Turkey, when they were essentially going for Ukraine's capitulation. And what it shows is that Trump is on the side of Putin, as he has shown twice in the US General Assembly, voting together with a dozen of crooked countries refuting to condemn Russia. So Trump is simply an obedient servant of Putin.
So what's going on then between Dmitriev and Witkoff? We saw what happened with the Saudi Prince MBS and how much money the Trump family, are getting out of their ties to Saudi Arabia, and the monetization of the presidency and the monetization of foreign policy, with Jared Kushner getting $2 billion from the Saudi Sovereign Investment Fund. Is the same thing happening, given that Kirill Dmitriev is in charge of the Russian Sovereign Investment Fund? Is it possible? And we know that Witkoff has a background with ties in his real estate business with Len Blavatnik, who is one of Putin's oligarchs and essentially one of his bagmen. So am I being too cynical to suggest that there could be a huge payoff for Trump and his family coming from Putin? Because Putin, to get this deal, not that I don't think the Ukrainians will ever sign this deal, and hopefully the Europeans can step up and stop it or change it. But the long and the short of it is that it has to be worth billions and billions to Putin to get out of this jam that he's put himself in with Ukraine. And the only way he's going to win that war is via this Trump peace plan. So that's what my suspicion is, that it's a business deal for Putin. Throw a few $1 billion at Trump. That's all he cares about is money. And I'll get off the hook in Ukraine.
Yeah, but it's also possible, say, what media are reporting is that the Trump family has made at least $3 billion, mainly through crypto, on his presidency so far. So this is the most blatantly corrupt regime that we are seeing anywhere in the world doing so openly, and certainly in the democratic world. We're used to see that crooked presidents in countries like Russia and China and Yemen, etc., are making tens of billions of dollars. So in the US, the money is slightly less. But the striking thing is that Trump is blatantly and openly taking money, and it's often surprisingly small money. The Swiss just gave him a gold piece worth $130,000 plus a Rolex clock. Perhaps all of it cost $200,000. And then Trump cut the tariff on Switzerland from 39% to 15%. Of course, that was a sensible thing to do, but he did it for a personal bribe. Similarly, Tim Cook of Apple delivered a big gold piece as an iPhone to Trump, and then he got rid of tariffs. So Trump is blatantly and openly corrupt, and often he takes surprisingly small bribes. Of course, it was the $400 million airplane from Qatar that he took, and he is then suing the media for $15-16 million, one company after the other. So Trump is there as no other president has ever been to make money in what is basically legal fashion, but very few laws are actually applied to the president. So I don't think that that Putin needs to pay billions to Trump. He just needs to flatter him in giving a few $100,000, and then Trump might go along and betray Ukraine, betray U.S. foreign policy interests, and betray Europe, and in effect end the existence of NATO. So this is how petty Trump is. So you should not take for granted that he makes a lot of money, just that he's deeply corrupt and immoral.
So this is worse than the Munich sellout, because obviously Munich led to World War II. And if you look at this 28-point program that Trump is foisting on Zelensky, and by the way, it turns out now, according to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, that NABU and SAPO, the two watchdog groups inside of Ukraine that uncovered the corruption in this Mindich, who's apparently escaped to Israel, that whole investigation apparently was fostered by the Trump administration. So they're working with Russia to weaken Zelensky, who's on the ropes now because of this corruption scandal. And the deal, if you go through the 28 points, some of them are just so outrageous. For example, cutting the troops down from 850,000 to 600,000. Trump asks no such thing from Putin. I mean, it's only Ukraine that has to disarm, not Russia. And Russia, after all, is the one that invaded the country and is trying to destroy it, and is creating massive human rights violations. And by the way, they get amnesty for all of their atrocities. They also have said in the text of this 28-point plan that all Nazi ideology and activities must be rejected and prohibited. That's pure Russian propaganda. And then they force Ukraine to have an election in 100 days. There's no such request on the part of Russia, not that the elections in Russia are meaningful in any way. So it's outrageous. Have you looked through it? And by the way, what are you hearing about what the Wall Street Journal is reporting? That the Trump administration is behind the NABU and SAPO investigation to weaken Zelensky to force him to make this terrible deal?
There, I doubt it. Last summer, the U.S. didn't say a word in public when last July, Zelensky put through legislation to weaken SAPO and NABO, the two independent anti-corruption bodies. It was the European Commission that pushed hard, and Ukrainian civil society. And also now, when it has come through, the US has not said anything in public. What they have done privately, I don't know, of course, but I think it's right, as you say, that they are utilizing it in order to weaken Zelensky, but we are not pushing it because the Trump administration has weakened all corruption controls that the U.S. has, both at home and the Foreign Corruption Practices Act. I hear from the lawyers in Washington have been working on that, but they are now without a job, essentially, without tasks. They still have their employment because this is no longer an issue. Instead, they are being transferred to work on other issues because the Trump administration favors corruption, both at home and abroad. So the silver lining I see is that Trump is irrelevant in the Ukrainian drama. If what I advise on the internet, on social media, is that Ukraine and Europe ignore Trump, ignore this plan, because this is a pure Kremlin plan. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem as if they are going to do so, but there's a strong opinion in line with my views that this is, as you point out, completely unacceptable. This is a capitulation. Ukraine would give up a part of Donetsk that the Russians have all the time failed to conquer. And it means effectively that Ukraine will not be a sovereign country any longer. It will have to commit itself not to join the NATO, and it will be strictly restricted what it can do. So this is taking away the sovereignty from Ukraine. And you are seeing then the think tank community in Washington, in particular Ambassador Dan Fried, has a big article today arguing how Ukraine should argue on it. I think that they should just say no, reject it. Trump is not a party. The U.S. does not give any money to Ukraine any longer, and it doesn't give any arms. It sells a tiny amount of arms. This year, it's a couple of billions of dollars, which is nothing. Do you think that the Ukrainian defense costs about $100 billion a year? So this is irrelevant. Then they say intelligence. Well, that is impossible for me as an outsider to judge, but I would presume that Ukraine and Europe can fill up most of intelligence needs. So my advice to the Ukrainians and the Europeans is don't deal with Trump. Trump is a servant of Putin, and he's not a friend of Ukraine. He's not a friend of Europe, and he couldn't care less about NATO.
Well, it's obvious, just in closing, Anders, that the Kremlin's not making a deal over territory. I mean, they're talking about territory, but the real purpose of what Putin is doing is to kill Ukraine's democracy, because what frightens him more than anything else is to have a successful democratic country next door with the rule of law. And that's going to obviously affect the Russian people, who are basically so supine and beaten down by propaganda that they don't seem to recognize that all Putin stands for is gangster government, which is what he has with his friend next in Belarus. So nobody wants what Putin's offering, whether they're in Moldova or in Georgia. But Trump, of course, doesn't care about democracy. He's trying to undo American democracy. So none of this is surprising to me.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I should emphasize, when I was in Kiev the second week of September this year, I heard about all of these cases. The three main culprits, or four main culprits in the corruption story, the names were out. In the elite, everybody talked about it. This was the main discussion. And it was expected that there would be a full-fledged case against them. But, with court cases, you never know when it is actually being brought out. And here it was. It did not come as a surprise to the Ukrainian elite, because that's what they told me, or the civil society. And it was specifically these people, the Minister of Justice, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the former Minister of Defense, who were singled out. The Minister of Energy, whom I met, was not obvious, but she was a more junior person previously. So it's not obvious that she is really involved. But the others, it was clear. People knew about it. Ukraine is an extremely transparent country, and that's why they are able to sort these things out. So it would be wonderful if the US had an ability to handle the top-level corruption in such a way as Ukraine now is able to do.
Well, Anders Aslund, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, Ian, as always.
And again, I've been speaking with Anders Aslund, who's a senior fellow at the Stockholm Free World Forum, a professor at the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University, and a former senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. A member of the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, he worked as a Swedish diplomat in Moscow and served as an economic advisor to the governments of Russia and Ukraine. And his books include Ukraine, What Went Wrong and How to Fix It, and Russia's Crony Capitalism, The Path from Market Economy to Kleptocracy. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.